At the moment I left my body, I no longer felt any pain, and that was wonderful. So I was welcomed by this light that wasn't like sunlight or any other light that could be compared to light on earth.
Mrs. Mehne, as a result of research into the process of dying, or thanatology, a lot is known about so-called near-death experiences. But many people who have had such experiences either can't or don't want to talk about them. You are part of a group of people who have found very beautiful words to describe your experiences, and you published a book about them just recently. So would you tell us what you experienced?
Ja, da muss ich Sie, zu erzählen, was ich erlebt habe, muss ich Sie in eine Zeitreise mitnehmen, denn es ist ja jetzt schon 20 Jahre her.
In order to tell you about what I experienced, I'll have to take you on a journey through time, because this happened 20 years ago. When I look at myself in the mirror today, I can't believe what was happening in my life at that time, and how unwell I was in order to be that close to death. 20 years ago, I was at the peak of my life. I was a self-employed physiotherapist and had my own small office. We had 3 children. Life was colourful, full, and of course, often we didn't get enough sleep. But actually, I felt like I was at the peak of life. Then I caught the flu in May 1995, which turned out to be quite severe. The symptoms were extremely intense. I had never experienced anything like it before. The strange thing was that I'd had one of my typical premonitions. The message of the premonition was, "This illness will bring death." At the time, this seemed very strange to me, because I hadn't thought about death in this way. But the premonition was so intense that I couldn't ignore it. Deep inside, I actually started dealing with it. From today's point of view, this was quite good, because as a result, I was able to cope far better with how events then developed. The symptoms of my illness got a lot worse. I was sent to hospital. Quite early on, the doctors thought it was cancer, but they couldn't find any histological evidence for it. They were in the dark for quite some time. I had one examination after another to find out why I was feeling so unwell. I experienced a high fever over and over again. I lost a lot of weight. I was sweating at night. I had skin hemorrhages. And eventually I suffered from a stomachache so severe that it could only really be stopped by giving me morphine.
Und es kam dann auch der Moment, wo ich sogar künstlich ernährt wurde.
Then came the moment when I had to be fed artificially, and deep inside, I had the feeling, if the doctors don't find out what's wrong with me, I will die.
So, the illness just developed from everyday life?
At the beginning, it was a kind of intense flu that I had never experienced before. My limbs ached horribly, and I suffered from a weariness that I couldn't shake off. Dealing with the situation internally and preparing myself for death had a positive effect on me. At the time, I had just one book about the subject on my bookshelf. It was called Children and Death by Elisabeth Kübler-Ross, and was about the way children deal with death. I realized that this helped me a lot because children cope with the topic with a certain ease and serenity.
Wo ich gemerkt habe, das tut mir gut, und in dieser inneren Auseinandersetzung mit dem Sterben muss ich auch sagen,
although this might sound awful, When I went through this inner examination of dying, it didn't seem bad. But I was in such a bad state that I knew deep inside, if the doctors can't find anything, then this is going to be my path. Then this moment came. It was the 14th of September, 1995. I was given an ultrasound examination. There they found out that I had a bladder and bowel paralysis. I think because I had already dealt with the situation internally, and because on that day I also had the feeling I wouldn't have any energy left to cling to this life. Everything happened very quickly and easily.
What happened then?
Well, it happened very quickly, and when I left my body it was quite sudden and surprising. So I came out of my body from the top of my head with ease and certainty. From today's perspective, I would say there was no way to escape or resist it. However, the one thing that still surprises me is the impression I got that there was an energy that started from my body which made me exit my body. But there was also something that welcomed me, something that picked me up, as if leaving my body was controlled by two sides. After I'd left my body, I was really surprised at first, because I looked at my body from above and I saw it. Yes, that's my body, that's my shell. But it didn't affect me anymore. And I was really surprised because I realized that I existed in a form that was different from my physical being. And I felt livelier than ever before. It was pretty astonishing, but beautiful. Because at the moment I left my body, I no longer felt any pain, and that was wonderful. I no longer had a sense of time. It had completely vanished. I got the impression that I'd already skipped the tunnel. I hadn't had time for that.
Ich bin eben von diesem Licht empfangen worden, von einem Licht,
So I was welcomed by this light that wasn't like sunlight or any other light that could be compared to light on earth. It was a light of such beauty and brightness, and it didn't dazzle me. So I just felt bright joy. This light, how shall I put it? My identity that I need to make sense in the earthly way was also absorbed by this light, so to speak. I became one with the light. And this was a state. It was so delightful. I'd never experienced anything so wonderful in my life, which is why I believe that this couldn't have been anything earthly. What I met at this moment, or what I turned into, it was like becoming one with the light.
What happened next?
Today I can only tell you one thing after another, but at the time I had the feeling everything was happening at once. From today's standpoint, this is also a numinosum for me. In this light, I experienced a love, a freedom that I hadn't known in that form before. I got the feeling, if I actually died now, it would be wonderful. So dying wouldn't be that terrible at all. Of course, everything that happens before, those long paths of suffering that many people have to go through, as was the case with me too, of course they are horrible and dreadful, But when you get to the moment of death, it can only be beautiful. Although, and this is something I need to stress, I didn't actually die. I didn't experience the moment of clinical death either, so one should look at it in a differentiated manner. But I got the impression, if this is the dying process, it's got to be beautiful.
Gab es für Sie dann auch so einen Moment der Entscheidung?
Was there a moment of decision-making when you had to decide, or when you were pushed to go back into your body?
No, that didn't happen. The return to my body happened as suddenly as leaving my body. I had to go back really quickly, so to speak, and didn't find this return something horrible. I felt extended and huge, like eternity. And now I had to go back into this small, tiny body, and of course I could instantly feel all its pains and agonies. This was a horrible feeling.
Sehr schrecklich empfunden und ich habe auch viele Jahre gebraucht,
It took me many years to accept that I was sent back. And it took me a while to reconcile myself to life again. However, one thing I should mention is this biographical movie I saw. I had the feeling it was very extraordinary and dense. I saw a lot of images, and these images were combined with situations. I could perceive all the feelings, all the things that played a role in each respective scene. But here I'm also of the opinion that the wealth of images from birth up to that moment that I had reached in my life was so intense and shown at such a high pace that I'd like to say that no human brain could ever work and think like that.
Also die Idee, in eine Dimension hineingetaucht zu sein, in dem Moment, wo ich den Körper verlassen hatte.
The idea that I left my body to dip into a dimension that was beyond space and time at that moment is strongly linked with that biographical film.
Und das Irre war, ich habe Bilder gesehen, die ich...
The crazy thing was that I saw images that I had forgotten, or images I hadn't remembered because I'd been far too young.
Die ich auch gar nicht wissen sollte. Und
these were memories I shouldn't have known, which really unsettled me. I even checked if they were true afterwards because they seemed so outrageous. But I also understood why these things happened or had to happen. Because at the moment of immersion into this dimension, what should I call it? It came to redemption and reconciliation with everyone who'd been involved in it. And therefore no hard feelings were left. All these emotions I'd gone through, the beautiful but also the painful parts of my life, were also absorbed by this light, so to speak. So that today, when I think about it, I'd say, I think that everybody who is at the verge of death is possibly confronted with his or her life once more in order to pass over in a reconciled form. These are all moments where I can say, if dying might be like this, we really don't need to be scared.
That means, if I've understood you correctly, when you mentioned that you experienced all the emotions that were part of a life situation, you didn't just sense your own feelings, but also other people's feelings involved in this situation?
Yes, and also so I would understand why they were acting like that at a particular moment, and why they couldn't act in a different way.
You described your experiences in the book Light Without Shade. Here, the reader finds out that you had left your body even as a child, but you were not aware of it for several decades. What happened at the time? From today's perspective, how did this come about?
That was also truly phenomenal. Maybe I should mention something else before I answer this question. because I think it might not be possible to understand otherwise. I had the near-death experience on 14th of September 1995, and just 3 weeks later, the doctors were able to identify my illness. They diagnosed a highly malignant T-cell lymphoma. This is an extremely aggressive cancerous disease and can be compared to acute leukemia. Without medication, it's impossible to survive this disease. This means that all the experiences I had on the 14th of September were at first forgotten. My everyday life was spent in hospital. Then I had several treatments of chemotherapy. And then in March of 1996, I had a bone marrow transplant. And so it was like another step towards the verge of death, where I had the idea or hope of being completely healed. Hence, the near-death experience was buried like a treasure chest. I didn't really know about the near-death experience myself, so I didn't really know how to refer to the whole experience. How could I use it for my life? How could I even explain or describe it, or make it into something I could use for myself? It was only 4 years later that I found out what a near-death experience was by watching a TV program.
You explain this very beautifully as an eye-opening experience. So now you've found a term for it.
That was truly an eye-opening experience. I'd found a term for it, and I also got the idea that there were other people that had experienced something similar, so I wasn't the only one at all. Because I'd occasionally had the thought that I might have gone crazy, since I felt such a longing in me. And I also had the impression that I was somehow stuck between heaven and earth. I didn't really feel this earthly life, and that I'd been lucky that I might have actually beaten cancer. But one should also bear in mind that I was very weak and in a bad shape physically. I even had difficulty keeping up with everyday life. Just when I realized what I had experienced, my brain released these experiences step by step, so to speak, so I could process them. This was also an experience I'd had as a child. I can't tell you at what age exactly, but I think I was 7 years old when it happened. While I was playing, I fell into a water butt. We were playing selling flowers, and I was supposed to fetch water from the butt with a small cup over and over again. But the water butt was only half full. So in order to get some water, I had to lean quite far forward. I lost my balance and got stuck in the water butt. And at that moment, I left my body and floated above my body. And I felt a lightness, love, and freedom. But I didn't start having this relationship with the light. Then my older sister grabbed my leg, pulled me out again, and hit my back quite hard so that I would spit out the water. And so she managed to prevent anything worse from happening.
Pim van Lommel, who is a Dutch cardiologist and researches the process of dying, described your book as, I quote, one of the most intimate and open-hearted accounts of going through a near-death experience that I've ever read. However, at first, it wasn't so natural for you to speak about your experiences openly and in public. What made you change your mind?
Well, the decision to do this came because I was so outraged. I thought I'd gone mad. Because in our society, it's so difficult to categorize these areas of experience. Because science hasn't done enough research in this field, or just because it's a taboo topic. This infuriated me so much that I thought I'd gone mad. Although deep inside I was convinced I hadn't gone mad. But how can you position yourself? I didn't dare talk about it for a long time because I was scared I would be branded a mental case. When I started talking about it, the reactions in my surroundings were not all that friendly. It deeply hurt me how it was possible that somebody had had such a precious experience, maybe the deepest experience of her life, and nobody was interested. And then I was lucky enough to meet some experts in the field quite early on. One of the first experts I met was Professor Ewald, who'd had the chance to go into the light in the same year I met him, and he's also written many books about it. One expert told me, "You're not crazy, and this phenomenon has existed ever since people existed, and it's something completely natural. It's actually very important that we talk about it." It was wonderful to meet experts, and through these experts I met other people who had had a near-death experience. And at that moment it was just wonderful to meet other people who'd been through similar experiences, and they knew exactly what level I was on. There was an instant understanding. For example, I also realised that sometimes I think a lot faster than I can speak, and it is wonderful to skip from level to level at that pace with other people.
Like many other people who've had similar experiences, your experiences have had a long-lasting effect on you and have changed you profoundly. In one section of your book, you describe yourself as a traverser between worlds. On the one hand, you're supposed to be in your role as the laughing and energetic Sabine in your surroundings. On the other hand, you can't be the same person as before due to your experiences. What is it like today? Would you still call yourself a traverser between worlds?
Yes, I still feel like a traverser between worlds, but I have to say it's easier to jump between worlds now. I just need to be close to this dimension deep inside me, and it's easiest to do that when I'm somewhere quiet, or when I deal with the topic, as when I have an exchange with others. On the other hand, I also feel a great longing to live a normal and small life again, and I enjoy it even more than I did before. But I've also noticed that these experiences have changed me to a huge degree. Often the world is just too full, too colourful, too weird, and too violent. There are days when I can't listen to the news because I can no longer bear to hear what they're doing on our planet. Then I just need to protect myself. That's why I don't listen to the radio anymore when I'm by myself. Then I just need peace and quiet, and to be able to feel at one with the light and me, and that in its pure form. That might sound a bit strange, but at one point I realised that this light that I long for at all times isn't only available somewhere and sometime, but is always here. It's in me now as much as it will be later when I die and go into the light. This divide doesn't exist for me. This removal of duality has probably been the most brutal experience. Because when we move around in the earthly world, we always need opposites as an orientation to find our way. We need day and we need night. We need the good and the bad. We always need opposites. Partially, I don't need them anymore. I'm able to completely feel this oneness every now and again. That's something wonderful and something I need. That's probably also the thing people look for when they meditate, when they sing, or when they do things where they have to focus on the moment. And that's what I need as well. That's why the division of life and death doesn't exist for me anymore. For me, the dead are as alive as the living are dead, if I may describe it like that.
Why do you think there is some sort of rejection of experiences such as yours in our society? Why don't people just open the door and say, wonderful? Obviously, life offers a lot more than just the existence we know. Why do you think people are afraid to be confronted by such experiences?
I think it's mainly because they are afraid. They're afraid of death and illness. That's what I experienced a lot at the time. When I didn't have hair on my head, everyone thought I embodied death, so to speak. I constantly confronted the people around me with their own death and frailty. That's something I found very shocking, that I had to comfort people, although I would have probably needed comfort. That's also kind of an experience. When you've been so sick that you were lucky to be healed, then you've had the experience that you can endure a severe illness. We always think that there is little that we are able to endure, but humans can endure so much. That's what we also see when we take a look at the suffering in the world. Compared to somebody who is politically persecuted and tortured, my illness was probably quite easy to cope with. We can endure an awful lot. When we are confronted with it, our consciousness or our soul, or whatever you'd like to call it, finds a way to endure it, and that's incredible. So I didn't just have the near-death experience where I wasn't afraid of dying anymore, but I also had this deep experience that no matter what happens to me, I will die someday, and nobody knows how it will happen. But I know I can manage it. And that's incredible. I'd even like to call it beautiful, because I no longer have to be scared. Of course, I'm scared when I have to go to hospital. I'm very scared. I'm actually a coward. And I'd do anything not to need any more operations or anything similar in the future. But once the day comes, I still know that I can trust that everything will be fine.
What's your wish regarding how our society handles death and dying? What would need to change from your point of view?
I think things would have to change in such a way that people were more willing to deal with their emotions, meaning that they should accept that pain and grief are emotions that are as important as joy and love. They shouldn't just focus on one side, but also on the other side, because they have valuable experiences. And if we are no longer scared of death, this also raises the question, do we have any idea if there's something coming after death or not? This is directly connected. And of course, when you have the idea that the body falls apart and that life is finished after death, then you can say, of course, it's sad that a life ends now. Or also when a child dies. It is sad when a 3-year-old child has to die and didn't have the opportunity to live a whole life. But it's not up to us to decide how long a life lasts. Life is a gift, and nobody knows how much time we've got. And I actually have the idea that due to my experiences, I was allowed to feel that the physical dimension isn't the decision-making dimension. But that there must be a dimension in which my essence, or the part that's left of my consciousness, in which it goes into, or rather that I'm already part of. And thus I've got the deep certainty that my body will eventually stop working and that it will die, but that the essence of me will live on forever. From that point of view, death should be a joyful celebration. And if you take religion seriously, funeral services should be different.
Actually, that would already be my next question. Life after death is a classic topic for all religions. In your book, you describe how you embarked on a journey through worldviews. How is your relationship with various religions today? Has it changed due to your experiences?
Ja, mein Bezug zur Religion hat natürlich eine gehörige Überprüfung nach sich gezogen.
Of course, my connection to religion led to a serious examination. I looked critically at my religion, and I was surprised by the images I carried around that had been taught to me in religious education, and of course also taught by my parents. Despite me not having had a strict religious upbringing, nevertheless I had these images of a punishing God in my mind, or the topic of sin, and also purgatory. And there I was wondering, how did these images get into my mind and heart? I was shocked. Due to my experiences, I was able to understand something completely different, that there is no punishing God, if God, as we call him, even exists. For me, the term God is actually too narrow. Actually, we shouldn't use any terms. Of course, we still use these terms because we need them. I love the absence of terms. And I'd also like to encourage people to say, we don't need to be able to label everything. And even if we don't label something, it is still allowed to exist. Well, I'd just like to encourage people to have more freedom to think for themselves and more freedom to feel for themselves, to open up to the fact that there is a dimension that is beyond everything, or a dimension that already affects us but doesn't need to be labelled. And this dimension seems to have such love and glory that it's only beautiful when we're in contact with this dimension.
It seems the term freedom is very important to you. Fundamentally, religions are supposed to lead to freedom as well. On the one hand, by offering ethical concepts that should guarantee a peaceful and meaningful life together. On the other hand, by offering an outlook that there is more than just the physical world and our material life. Why do you think religious concepts often lead to the opposite, to a lack of freedom?
Well, I think for me, religions are something created by humans. Every time a religion tries to organize itself in a certain system, it has hierarchical problems and rules and so on. Then often the term power comes into play as well. We all know how prone humans are to abusing their power. That's one aspect.
Die Freiheit, die ich mir wünsche, hat eigentlich viel mehr damit zu tun, dass eine Religion die Menschen überzeugen sollte, beziehungsweise
the freedom I'd wish for is more a religion that should convince people, or more specifically enable people to have a depth of experience. That people are enabled to experience what it means, for example, to be carried at all times and protected from whatever comes. That they are aware of that deep in their hearts. There is something we belong to, and that is here for us. That's something I've got to experience myself. That's nothing somebody can preach to me. And I just believe it because I can't come up with anything better.
Also die Religionen sollten sich öffnen und sollten
Religions should open up and review their rules and analyse whether they actually relate to life and serve people. And they should give people more opportunities to witness and experience things. Maybe they should also bring death back into life again. Like when people stand at a deathbed and they are allowed to experience when a person passes away in peace. Then they'll feel exactly this energy and power that I was allowed to experience.
So the problem is that it's actually about experiences. But if these experiences are lacking in a religion or a religious community, then dogmas and rules of conduct become more and more important.
Yes, that's also something I noticed in my church with great disappointment. Because my priest, although he really made an effort and was very nice and loving, he didn't know what to do with me. Today I know that the young theologians who are being trained now are not taught about near-death experiences at all. It's slowly beginning to change, but most of them don't know about it, as well as many doctors and nurses who haven't been informed about this phenomenon. It would be important to make it possible for this phenomenon to be included in various fields of professional training, just as information.
If you could draw an overall picture, how would you describe humanity? Do we travel between this world and the world beyond? What's the meaning of life?
Also meine Vorstellung ist eben, dass meine Körperlichkeit durch einen Geist.
My idea is that our physical being is sensed through a spirit, or as Pim van Lommel would call it, through an endless consciousness.
In dieser Form eine bestimmte Zeit hier auf diesem Planeten.
That I have to stay in this form on this planet for a certain period of time to gather experiences.
Gutes zu tun,
in order to do something good, to serve life, and to constantly reflect on the relationships in which I live. And I'd like to say one thing. Even if I'm a human on this planet who's had a near-death experience, I'm not immune to making mistakes and hurting others. It's not really possible to avoid it in human interaction, because it's inextricably linked and also limited. If I meet a person who represents hard reality and has the sensitivity of a box, then he won't be able to understand me. Then I will also disappoint this person, because his evaluation of me will inevitably just be of one aspect, due to his narrow-mindedness. And often when I'm in contact with people like this, I experience that the great love I feel triggers more fear and horror than freedom. And so I have had to learn to hold myself back. I usually check how I can make contact with various people so that it is acceptable for them. But even then, I can't always predict what will happen to the other person when I act in a certain way. Of course, there are arguments and conflicts sometimes. That's probably also what changed due to the near-death experience. Not only do I have less fear of dying, I also have less fear of life. This means I often dare to go to the heart of an issue and risk a conflict if there is a moment in a conversation when I can't agree anymore because it goes against my wholehearted conviction. Then I have to speak up. That can be quite explosive. But we're here on Earth to figure out what the right solution is. A solution that works for everyone. These are tedious processes, and many people aren't always keen on such processes. But some people aren't keen on dealing with the end of life either.
But it's also part of this learning process.
Yes, it's part of it too.
What is the most important message you'd like to share with other people due to your near-death and life experience? That we don't need to be afraid of death?
Yes, we don't need to be afraid of death, and we don't need to be afraid of life either. It's important to me that people become more grateful and more aware that life is a gift, and that it's our duty to live a good life, that we make an effort to spread love, and that we develop a culture of reflection. Freedom doesn't just mean that I want to be free and do everything I want. Freedom also means that I should evaluate and reflect on things. Is what I'm doing at the moment right? And can I improve it?
Self-reflection, self-awareness, and self-discovery. Do these things belong to the path of losing the fear of death?
Yes, of course, also that I envision how I'd like to die. Of course, we don't have control over this, but we can think about it. Well, I often think about my life back to front. Nowadays, I often wonder, who knows how much time I've got left? I don't postpone anything and live every day as if it was the last. This way, my life becomes a lot more intense. However, that doesn't mean that I'm always looking for intensity on the outside, and that I try to have as much fun and as many experiences as possible. But a day of peace and quiet is as valuable as travelling around the world and giving a lecture or watching a nice film. or having a great conversation with my children. I hope that I get a bit more time to contribute something in the world and to make a difference in the knowledge of near-death experiences and change some world views. And I'd like to enjoy the happiness that I'm still allowed to be with my husband and that we've survived a huge crisis together. I'd also like to spend more time living this small life with my husband and my family.
I wish you all the best. Thank you very much for this wonderful conversation, Mrs. Mehne.
Thank you.